I'd like to introduce you to my daughter, Izzy. On 29th of November 2011, at the age of 13, she was diagnosed with a rare bone cancer called Ewing's sarcoma. Just a month earlier, she'd been having riding lessons and she'd just accomplished her first rising trot. But the next day she woke up and she was in excruciating pain. It was so bad that she couldn't sit down. So on the advice of her GP, of our GP, we took her to our local A&E, and after several hours' wait, she was told that she'd need to spend the night there for an MRI scan the following morning. At 6 p.m. the following evening, my wife and I were taken into a room off the ward. Izzy wasn't invited. And we were shown the scan, and we didn't really know what we were looking at, a lump, a growth, something unidentified. We weren't sure. And I don't think the doctor was sure either. They said that they wanted to refer Izzy to a specialist at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. A specialist in what, they didn't say. There weren't any beds available in Manchester, so Izzy was told that she'd need to stay on the ward and wait until one became free. By this time, the pain had got so bad that they put Izzy on a continuous morphine drip. And we waited for almost 2 weeks. Lots of morphine, but no information, no sense of what was going on. Then we heard that a bed had become free. Izzy is transported by ambulance from our local hospital in Preston to Manchester. She arrives on the ward and she sees children walking around attached to infusion pumps. They've got no hair. And they're so pale, they look like they're dying. And some of them are. And it is, of course, an oncology ward, but no one had thought to mention that. Izzy has entered the valley of death, and she slowly realizes that there may be no return. She's terrified and in a state of shock, and so are my wife and I. That marked the start of a year of treatment for Izzy that involved 6 different hospitals, numerous blood transfusions, a failed stem cell harvest, an operation to remove her sacrum, and an 8-week-long NHS-funded trip to the United States for proton beam therapy. Without doubt, the reason that Izzy is fit and well today and has just celebrated 5 years cancer-free is because the clinical care she received during that terrible year was second to none. But that's only half the story. Whilst the care she received was excellent, she received virtually no prior information about the people she would meet, the environment she would be treated in, or the technology and processes that would be used to treat her. What little information there was, and there wasn't much, was directed at us as parents. And that left Izzy feeling isolated and ignored. She was kind of resistant to treatments because their purpose wasn't explained to her. And she was scared to go into a hospital because she didn't know what to expect. And that lack of preparedness left her feeling skeptical about the system. And to some extent, it's coloured her opinion of health services to this day. But this isn't all about Izzy. So, look at that, I mean, God. Across the board, provision of information for children going into a hospital is diabolically poor. So I started wondering what research had been done into the information needs of children going into hospital. I started trawling through academic papers, and I discovered that there's lots of research, and it all supports the common sense assumption that if children have a better understanding of what will happen prior to a health intervention, they experience reduced stress, reduced anxiety, and better clinical outcomes. But the problem is, in a cash-strapped NHS, the long-term health benefits and associated cost savings of giving our children the information they need and deserve is eclipsed by the short-term financial pressure to save money on budget line items year on year. So, against this backdrop of identified need in a climate of financial austerity, I started to think about what I could do to address this information gap, not just for child cancer patients like Izzy, but for any child anywhere about to go into hospital. What I wanted to do was I wanted to put health information directly in the hands of children in a way that makes them feel empowered, engaged, and informed, whilst having fun at the same time. Fortunately, as well as being a very, very proud father, I'm also the MD of a digital innovation agency. So for the last 2 years, my team and I have been working on a mobile app that we hope is going to address some of the lack of information that Izzy experienced. So our app aims to reduce stress and anxiety by introducing children to those people, those environments, and those processes using 3D augmented reality models, interactive models, using an artificially intelligent avatar guide that they can have conversational interactions with, and using a series of games that help to demystify some of that complex technology. Think of it as Pokemon Go meets The Sims. So as with any project we do, we always start by thinking about user needs. So back in the summer of 2015, the first thing we did was speak to groups of school children and ask them what they would do if they were building an app for other kids going into hospital. And they came up with some really brilliant ideas, many of which we've incorporated into our app today. But back then we didn't have any funding. We just had the seeds of what we thought was a good idea and a desire to make it happen. So we self-funded the development of some pretty rough and ready prototypes that just demonstrated the principles of what we had in mind. And then someone introduced me to this man. He's actually got a really serious job. His name's Peter Mark Fortune, and he's the Associate Clinical Head at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, which coincidentally is where Izzy was treated. So I showed him our prototypes and talked to him about our ideas, and he got it straight away. He was really, really enthusiastic. So much so, in fact, that he's become our clinical consultant now. And having a champion from within the NHS has been really important to us, not least because it's given us credibility with funders and stakeholders, but also because it's given us access to a hospital that we can use as a test bed. So with Peter Mark on board, we then applied for a relatively small amount of funding from the NHS, and that allowed us to do some user needs research in the hospital and to test our prototypes with patients and with parents and with clinicians. So at the end of that process, what we had was a validated proof of concept based on user needs. But it was a very long, long way from being a finished application. But yeah, so at the end of that process, we got this app, but by this time I'd invested literally hundreds and hundreds of hours into the project, and that's actually really difficult when you're also trying to manage a commercial agency. So we desperately needed some more funding if we were going to take the project any further. And trying to fund an early-stage digital health project in the current climate is really difficult. But there was one fund that I was aware of that I thought was a good fit for us, and that was Nominet Trust's Social Tech Seed Fund. So round about this time last year, perhaps a bit earlier, we put in an application to Nominet, and after a few tense months of waiting, we got the fantastic news that we've been successful. And that really enabled us to go from that very raggedy proof of concept that we had into what we have today, which is a fully featured prototype ready for a final round of investment before we release the app next year. So, Nominet, if you're in the room, thank you. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to just show you some of the features of our app and talk to you about how we hope that they address some of the problems of this information gap. So this is what play staff at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital currently use to prepare children for an MRI scan. They've got one in the entire hospital. It's the biggest children's hospital in the country. They've got one of these. And they use it in conjunction with Playmobil figures and an old CD player in the corner. It's really labour-intensive as well because it always requires a member of staff to be available to sit down with the children and explain what is going on. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful model, but it's not really that much like an MRI scanner. And it's also aimed at the very, very young. So in our app, what we do is we've got these interactive 3D models that a child can play with and explore at will. In this example, the child's just pressed a button and they're viewing an exploded view of the scanner that enables them to understand how all the component parts work. They could press another button and they can scan their avatar guide, and they can listen to the sound the scanner makes and then see a scan at the end of that process. And it's really important that we familiarize kids with technology like this. We know that in around 20% of cases, the scan has to be repeated because the child will move on the scanner bed, very often because they're ill-prepared or they're scared. That costs the NHS around £140 every time. And with 3 million scans a year, that's a lot of money. We're also using gamification to aid familiarization. In this example, a bedside patient monitor becomes a Flappy Bird-style minigame in which the player navigates the spaceship between two cardiovascular waveforms. One of the things I became conscious of when Izzy was ill is that being in a hospital ward can be a really lonely place, despite the fact that you're surrounded by other kids. And that's because if you're confined to your bed and you're hooked up to loads of machinery, the opportunities to interact are really limited. So what we're doing with games within the app is we're trying to use some of the language of multiplayer gaming, things like leaderboards and team play, to aid socialization across the ward. Something else we discovered when we were doing our user needs research is that we can meet some of the needs of clinicians too. So every NHS organisation is required to ask patients for feedback through something called the Friends and Families test. And they have to submit monthly returns, but return rates are pretty low, especially amongst children. So on average, about 1 in 5 questionnaires are returned from children. And we think the reason that rate is so low is because very often they ask for feedback in an inappropriate way. So when Izzy had just finished her 18th round of chemotherapy, and if any of you have had chemotherapy, you'll know that she was feeling pretty shit. When Izzy had just finished her 18th round of chemotherapy, this is how she responded to the friends and families test. And I think she was being a bit ironic when she said, ha, ha, ha. So what we're trying to do is, by engaging children in a conversational interaction with the Avatar Guide, is we're trying to get more qualitative feedback. We're trying to give the hospital possibly slightly better data and more useful data than they got from my daughter. What's important about these features and all the others, which I haven't had a chance to show you, is that they're all based on identified user needs. So by involving children at every stage of the process, we're hoping that we've built an app that they find engaging, empowering, and informative. And that brings me to what's next. So we're hoping to hear very soon about a final round of funding, and that will allow us to just build the finishing pieces before we launch the app next year. But more importantly, it will allow us to fund some independent clinical research into the efficacy of what we're doing. Hopefully proving that if we can put health information directly in the hands of children, in a language they understand, and using interaction paradigms that they're familiar with, then we have a chance to improve their health literacy, to reduce their stress and anxiety, and improve their clinical outcomes. And if we manage to do that, I will be a very happy man. Thank you.